Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Released September of 2019. Available on the Nintendo Switch. Retailing for $59.99. This is a remake of Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening from the original Game Boy. However, it does include many of the aspects that were added in the DX version for the Game Boy Color. When playing it, you will notice a very odd mix of features for this game, as many aspects are taken directly from the original, some are altered in minor and not so minor ways, and a few completely new things have been added. For example, the world map and the dungeon maps are essentially the same. So if you're familiar with the Game Boy original, you will still know where everything is located, and the dungeons will offer you no new mysteries. However, the various mini-games have been altered. Fishing and the crane game you can play are completely different now. And there are many more secret seashells to find, and you need to find more of them if you want to upgrade your sword. However, if you remember where they were in the original version, all of those are still present in their same locations. New for this version, we have a dungeon building mode. Throughout the game, you will find tablets. These tablets represent one room from a dungeon. You can then do challenges to create a certain kind of dungeon, and there are rewards for it. However, there's no way to share these outside of having someone play your copy of the game. It almost seems like this was some kind of beta test for a Zelda Maker game that never ended up happening. Though that is simply speculation on my part. If you're familiar with the original Game Boy version, the story and setting is exactly the same. Link has been shipwrecked on an island, and while the natives seem friendly to him, this island isn't what it seems. It is simply the dream of the Windfish, a godlike creature that is sleeping inside an egg atop the highest mountain on the island. So, if nothing else, the setting is very different. There is no Hyrule, there is no Princess Zelda, and there is no Ganon. But the structure of the game is still roughly the same. You have 8 dungeons to go through. In each dungeon, you will get a new item for Link, and after fighting a boss, you will get one instrument that you will use to help wake the Windfish. However, you can't simply go from one dungeon to the next. Link's Awakening, back on the Game Boy, was the first Zelda game where between dungeons you had other things you needed to do before you could access the next dungeon. In fact, even the first dungeon can't just be walked into, because almost every dungeon requires you to get a key to open it in the first place. And while there's a lot of different things you have to do between levels, it's virtually always in service of getting that next key. So when you want to start that first dungeon, first you need to go the opposite direction it's in, into the forest, to find a raccoon. You need to put some powder on that raccoon so you can get past it to get the key. And that will also involve you having to figure out how to get magic powder. The second dungeon, on the other hand, is the only dungeon that doesn't require a key. But it will require you to rescue a dog that's been kidnapped, and then use the dog to eat the things that are in front of the dungeon's entrance. And this trend will continue throughout the game. And it's not a bad thing, really, as trying to figure out what you need to do next will lead you to explore more of the map than you would otherwise. Which, of course, will lead you to find things. Secret seashells, pieces of heart, or pieces for the dungeon building minigame, or find the next step in the trading sequence, as Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game to have a trading sequence. One thing this remake takes advantage of is the fact your controller has a lot more buttons than an original Game Boy. Because in the original version, you had to equip everything. So even things like the bracelet to lift heavy rocks and your sword could be taken off. In this version, you always have your sword. And once you get the strength bracelet, it's always on you. And you have a button especially assigned for running with the Pegasus boots. And just the fact you don't have to put on the boots and the bracelet and your sword over and over again prevent you from having to open the menu multiple times in every single room of a dungeon. And the game still gives you 2 item slots. So in one of my item slots, I always had the Rock's Feather. as outside of the bracelet and boots, that's easily the most used item in the game, as it lets you jump, and there are many occasions for which you need to jump. This means that the only other things you need to choose between are much more situational items. Bombs, magic powder, your bow and arrow, the magic wand very late in the game, and none of those are items you're necessarily going to use constantly. And without the need to constantly switch your items around, the game flows much more smoothly. In an odd move, some enemies, including some bosses, have been changed. And I find it odd which ones were left alone and which ones were changed. If an enemy has a sword and a shield, you will now need to block with your shield before you can attack it. I'm not sure what exactly the point of this was. It does set them apart a little bit from other enemies. Or this boss that you have to fight 4 times in the one dungeon. A giant skeleton. They've made it so you can't attack him until he's telegraphing one of his own attacks. I'm not sure what exactly the point of this was. It doesn't really make him harder. It just makes the encounters with him take more time, really. I'm not really sure what the point of these changes were, but it seems to me they should have either changed every enemy and boss, or changed none of them. I find it odd that only certain ones got any attention at all. So is Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, for Switch, worth your time and money? I'm kind of torn here, actually. On the one hand, Link's Awakening is my personal favorite Zelda game. On the other hand, this is a $60 remake, and a lot of the more important aspects of this game have simply gone untouched. The world map is virtually unchanged. None of the dungeons have been changed to any extent as far as I can tell, though a scant few bosses have been slightly changed. I just don't know that more modern graphics and needing to open the menu less is really worth $60. Especially when you consider that if you're paying for the $20 tier of Nintendo Switch Online, you have access to a library of Game Boy games. And in that library is the DX version of Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Which, yes, does look a bit dated by today's standards, but the gameplay of that is still pretty solid overall. And as much as I may have enjoyed playing this remake, it's not really adding enough to justify its $60 price tag. And honestly, the feature where you can build your own dungeons to a certain extent, this feature could have just been more than it was. If there was some way where you could connect with people and share the dungeons you make, that might actually make the $60 price tag worthwhile. As you could share your dungeons, play other people's dungeons, make it something like the Mario Maker community. But as it stands now, it's sort of a why bother feature. Since you're the only person making these dungeons, it's a little hard to surprise yourself with anything. So unfortunately, and it pains me a little to say it, I do recommend passing on the Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening remake, at least at a price tag of $60. If this were more like $30 to $40, I would probably be recommending it, but at $60, it just seems too much. Which really is kind of a shame. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.